Thanks. I'm happy to have followed my colleague Alice Kaswan. When I invited Alice to participate, we threw around a few ideas about what she might talk about, and she threw out this idea of talking about decentralizing cap and trade. And at the time, I was thinking, wow, you have just articulated kind of a kind of idea of a research topic that I had in my head, and this idea, how do we integrate the state programs that are being developed with a potential federal program. But as I thought about it, I was very happy to leave the task of thinking about that to Alice, because I found it quite intimidating myself. Some of my own work on cap and trade programs has dealt a little bit more with the enforcement issue, so I was glad also to have Matt Bogosian's comments on enforcement. And in particular, the argument that I put forth in one of those papers is that in cap and trade, enforcement is much more important than in traditional regulation. In traditional regulation, if you don't have enforcement, you might simply have a decrease in the environmental performance of a particular facility or group of facilities. In cap and trade, it undermines the whole market system because it means that the actual currency of the market is unreliable. So I find the topic of the need for enforcement in cap and trade to be very interesting as well. But given that Alice took my topic, I had to come up with another one. And so today I'll talk to you a bit about regional climate initiatives. And my first point is that there is a surprisingly high level of coordination in policy making and institution building among the states of the United States in the arena of climate policy. Yet in environmental law, states have most often been theorized to act as competitors in crafting their environmental policies. Either they would engage in a race to the bottom or a race to the top, and I'll describe both of those. But my presentation today will describe the extent of state collaboration that we're seeing and try to analyze in a preliminary fashion why states have been motivated to collaborate in climate law. So an important initial question regarding the high level of state activity in climate change policy is the simple question of why individual states have chosen to become active in climate policy at all. Of course, to the extent that a state must bear the presumed costs of making and carrying out such policies without enjoying the presumed potential benefit, namely an appreciable decrease in the risks of climate change to their geographical territory, states appear to be acting irrationally. Now, this has been explored in literature quite a bit. Scholars have pointed out that there are other benefits, political benefits, economic benefits of becoming a leader in developing state climate change policies. So that help explain this, they help explain this puzzle. My focus is somewhat different. I'm interested in why states have chosen to coordinate and collaborate with other states in their development of climate change law and policy. In particular, why have so many states joined regional climate initiatives like the Western Climate Initiative, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and the Midwestern Greenhouse Gas Accord? So let me first give you a sense of the extent of this regional institution building by looking at each of these programs. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, has been mentioned a couple times. This involves 10 northeastern and mid-Atlantic states, and their efforts to coordinate began in 2003. That coordination produced a memorandum of understanding that was signed in December of 2005. RGGI established a cap and trade program covering carbon dioxide emissions only from power plants only in the 10-state region, and the program came online in January of this year. The program caps emissions from these power plants in these 10 states at 2009 levels until the year 2015, and then the caps decline a couple percent per year, such that by 2019, the caps reach 10% below the 2009 level. After agreeing to work together on this initiative, the RGGI states jointly drafted a model rule specifying the programmatic elements of RGGI, and then most of the states passed legislation to enact a version of that model rule. Here we also see that there are several observers. Observer jurisdictions do not commit to the group greenhouse gas reduction goals, but they participate in proceedings should they opt to join later. The Western Climate Initiative includes 7 states and 4 Canadian provinces. and the Memorandum of Understanding was signed in February of 2007. In August of 2007, a regional emissions target was jointly set by the WCI states and provinces, and that is to reduce the region's emissions to 15% below 2005 levels by 2020. In September of 2008, the WCI released its design recommendations for its regional cap-and-trade program, and when implemented, the new multi-sector program would cover nearly 90% of the region's emissions, including those not just from power plants and electricity generation more broadly, but from industry, transportation, and commercial facilities. And this program would begin in 2012. The Midwestern Regional Greenhouse Gas Reduction Accord there are 6 Midwestern states that participate and 1 Midwestern Canadian province. The accord itself was signed in November of 2007, and the intent is, like the WCI, to develop and implement a regional greenhouse gas reduction target. And the preliminary design recommendations were just released in December of 2008, specifying a 15 to 25% reduction from 2005 levels by 2020. So fairly ambitious. And it would be multi-sectoral as well, like WCI, covering power plants, factories, and possibly transportation fuels. A model rule is anticipated in that program by August of this year. So in total, considering all of these programs, all of these regional collaborations, 32 US states, the District of Columbia, 8 Canadian provinces, and 6 Mexican states are participants or observers. Now I should mention, these are the primary regulatory initiatives, regional regulatory initiatives. Of course, states are also cooperating in other arenas of climate change, particularly in litigation. The prominent case of Massachusetts versus EPA involved a bunch of states that collaborated to be the plaintiffs in that litigation, as well as non-state actors. Okay, so this extent I propose, this extent of collaboration runs contrary to the common theories of state competition, namely the race to the bottom theory and the race to the top theory. The premise in the environmental literature largely is that when federal standards are not set, states may compete for economic development opportunities through their environmental standards, through their environmental regulation. So in terms of the race to the bottom, according to this theory, states will compete to lower their standards so as to attract economic development to their state. And this theory itself has been a common justification for federal regulation, of course. Now, I'll point out that climate change is the type of environmental problem for which we might expect a race to the bottom in the absence of federal regulation. The costs to state residents may be very high. State regulatory action to reduce greenhouse gases could impose high costs on both existing and potential businesses in a given state. In contrast, the benefits of such regulation to that individual state may be non-existent or small. Furthermore, the emissions of reductions in a single state certainly cannot solve the problem of climate change. To the extent that it does contribute to solving the problem of climate change, those benefits accrue to all jurisdictions, right? Not just to the state. So under these conditions, one would expect that states acting alone would consistently under-regulate. Alternatively, there is the possibility that states may engage in a race to the top in environmental regulation. In a race to the top, states engage in strategic competition that involves raising their environmental standards in order to achieve some political or economic advantage. Now, looking at the development of state climate policy over the past several years, there seem to be elements of a race to the top. Many states have progressively increased, for example, the amount of electricity that must be generated by renewable sources under our renewable portfolio standards. There's a somewhat competitive dynamic that seems apparent in many states that have set greenhouse gas reduction targets. Some of them are somewhat symbolic, but still they all seem to be wanting to outdo each other in terms of stating rigorous targets. And in these examples, states seem almost to be in competition, again, to increase both the scope and the stringency of their environmental regulations.